trail Pakistan by only 29 after they bowled out for 133 with the debutant Colin de Grandhomme taking 6 for 41. I think the best debutant figures for a New Zealander, is that right, Andrew?
That's right, yeah.
There we go. Lots of records tumbling. Dogs stopped playing here yesterday, all sorts of things. Here, as we know, lunch the second day, 415 for 7, so 98 runs added by India today for those 3 wickets that they lost all to Moeen. Now, we of course have been hearing about the troubles of the Australian team down under, humbled by South Africa, and now looking to make big changes after losing 5 successive tests. It says on my notes here, and Adam forgot to mention the 5 successive one-day internationals as well. Adam, I mean, anyway, maybe the problem is they're missing their lucky charm. It's the first season for about 30 years that their old friend Jim Maxwell hasn't been leading the ABC radio commentary team. As many of you know, Jim's recovering from a stroke he suffered while working on the Rio Olympics from Australia, but he's hoping to make a return to the commentary box next month, and I'm really pleased. You heard him groaning and grunting in the background. And Jim joins us now from his home in Sydney. Hello, Jim.
Agus, how you going?
Well, I'm all right, but it's more a question, how are you doing? That's much more important. How are you getting on?
Well, I'm nicely set up at home. I don't think, other than going to a cricket ground, I need to go back to the office, that's for sure. I've got this wonderful setup as you do at home in Scotland, so I can have a chat to you. I've been doing little bits here and there on test match coverage and a few other programs, so just like sitting in my own studio. I've been sitting here watching some cricket from India. I'm watching the Australian Open golf as well, flicking around, and I'm keeping myself entertained. I'm not as mobile as I've been, but I'm getting there, and I'm heading off to a dinner tonight actually. I'm going to be chatting to your old mate.
Gary O'Keefe?
John Howard.
Oh, John Howard, oh my word, you're name dropping you. Oh, okay. You're mixing in those at high echelons these days, Jim.
Yes, well, it's an annual event of a dozen of us, and he's in the fold. It's in memory of one of his brothers, actually, who passed away a couple of years ago, Stanley. So it's one of those recurrent things, and my wife Jen has said, make sure you stop at the second glass of wine, please.
Oh, right, so you're being allowed out. Is this the first outing?
No, I've had a couple. There was one very good one the other night at the Bradman Foundation dinner, at which Bill Laurie and Graham Smith from South Africa were inducted into the Hall of Fame down in Barrel, and right. Bill Laurie was hilarious. He's the most self-effacing former tour defensive opening batsman you've come across. He's changed a lot since he was a player.
Yeah, lovely. Well, they all do in the end. Now, Jim, look. I've spoken to you a few times since this terrible event, which clearly has changed your life. You sound great. I mean, for a radio broadcaster, I suspect all sorts of things do go through your mind when you suffer a stroke. But, yet not least, how am I going to sound? Am I going to be able to work again? And I must admit, I mean, listening to you now, you sound terrific.
Speech pathologist kicked me out after 2 weeks, it has to be said, but I'm still having plenty of physio and occupational therapy because my leg and my right arm, my right hand side is not so good, but I'm really fortunate that I didn't lose my voice. I mean, I've been in rehab for upwards of 8 weeks, and there are plenty of people there who have lost their voice and probably haven't got a great chance of getting it back to anything like the condition mine is in. So I feel that I'm lucky in a way, given the prevalence of strokes. I mean, it's a statistic that hits you once you're in the fold. That is that one in 6 people get a stroke. Certainly in this country, I'm sure it's the same universally in the Western world. But that's a bad number, and when it sneaks up on you without any warning, it gives you a sense of your mortality.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet it does. What happened? I mean, can you remember? Were you aware of what happened? Because you were actually broadcasting at the time.
Yes, it was a combination of things. It's a matter of recognising your physical condition. I had apparently high blood pressure and atrial fibrillation, all things I found out subsequently, and I'd had a couple of rough days, about 9 days straight coverage from Sydney to save money, as were Channel 7, the host telecasters. So I had one of my friends in to talk about yachting, and I was introducing him, and all of a sudden my voice, I don't know what was, something, I had a flash through my brain, I don't know where it came from, and I felt very strange, and the words were coming out backwards. So, and one of the chaps said, yeah, it was really horrible. They replayed it on it. I hadn't heard it since, until Channel 9 did an interview with me about it, and they replayed it, and yeah, it's not pleasant to listen to. And one of my pals immediately said, he recognised it, he just, across the studio, said, Jim's just had a stroke. And so it was, and luckily the paramedics were there within 15 minutes and hit me with whatever injection they hit stroke victims with to settle me, and they carted me off to hospital, and that was that. I remember having one moment of reflection. I was leaving in a sort of semi-conscious state, and there were a lot of people standing around it, and I said, this is like the Olympics. It's developed into a spectator sport. So I didn't lose my sense of humour completely.
No, well, I'm sure you haven't. And yeah, I don't know. While you were in hospital, I mean, did you sort of fear the worst? I mean, did you have some pretty bleak times there?
I suppose that the first few days, because all of a sudden I was, paralysed down one side, and my speech wasn't nearly as good as it is now. I was slurring a few words, and I'd gone from going into hospital and being able to write my name and wiggle my toes and so on, to all of a sudden within an hour or two being in a much worse condition. So you can imagine in a situation like that, you're thinking, is this it? Is it going to get worse? Will it improve? And you're feeling pretty lousy anyway, feeling fairly sort of nauseous and whatever else at my feet. So once I got through the first 3 or 4 days, then the sort of realisation has set in that it was going to be a slow recovery, and it's been that way. It's 3 months since it occurred. I can walk around the place, not brilliantly, but I'm up and about. And putting the old Vegemite on a piece of toast is difficult with one hand, particularly when it's your left hand and your right handed. So I'm getting there, but I just have to be patient and persevere.
You'll find Marmite goes on much more easily, Jim.
Or Nutella, or something like that.
Well, exactly. I mean, without getting too deep, because you've never been that sort of person, but have you taken a look at, look at your life and everything else? You do talk about your own mortality a few moments ago. I mean, if you had moments like that?
The thing that's sort of saved me is my voice, because that's my stock and trade as a broadcaster. If I was a plumber or a violinist or something else where I had to use this right hand, it would be more dire. But the fact is, within a month, I was actually talking on the radio, and quite coherently, I thought, about 1 or 2 subjects. So I felt that was going to give me sort of motivation, inspiration to carry on. Even though I'm not getting around logistically, it's too difficult to travel interstate, the rest of it. So yeah, that's the most reassuring thing, and the support of my family and my wife, particularly as she was a nurse. So that's been wonderful in terms of the recovery and the guidance that I need. But I'm trying to withdraw from the pampered life. I actually dreaded leaving hospital, because I thought that once I'm out of hospital, no one will come and visit me anymore. And that's the great thing about being in hospital. All your friends tumble in. Yeah. And I had a very big room. I was very lucky. So I was able to sort of entertain a variety of people. But it's a bit quieter at home, so I've got to venture out.
Yeah, well you have, but taking your time, I guess. I mean, seriously, Jim, what are your targets now, work-wise? You're saying that getting around's a bit tricky, but getting up to these commentary boxes often isn't very easy, is it? I mean, are you going to be okay to get around?
We'll see. I'm doing the one day at the Sydney Cricket Ground in a couple of weeks. Australia and New Zealand, in this crazy season we have of hopefully in January when the test matches in Sydney I'll be able to do it. The one drawback through all this is, as the doctors keep saying, you have to remember that your brain has been affected, and that you need rest. And I find each day that chatting to you for half an hour, I was chatting to someone else this morning, I'm going to get fairly tired, and apparently that's quite natural. This is the post-stroke trauma that affects you, and I need to rest. So being conscious of that, a 5-day test match might find me out, I suppose, if we get 5 days.
Well, you probably won't, where you lot are playing.
That's right. I'm ready for you.
You let that one go very easily, Jim.
Well, I just saw Pakistan score today. They weren't too good against. Who was that? The new bowler? What's he bowl?
But you see, he's an off-spinner, and I used to play against his dad and all things. But you see, Jim, the trouble is the Australians, and you've just done a classic Australian thing there. Once you fellas are on the back foot, you throw it out everywhere else. You brought Pakistan there. Someone wrote a piece the other day in the Sydney Morning Herald, another terrible piece about Alistair Cook in England, simply because of the way that you lot are playing. Why can't the Australians take it on the chin? You're not playing great well at the moment. Stop blaming everybody else.
Well, it sounds like a panic setting in if you listen to James Sutherland too. He's really marked the selector's card, hasn't he? He said there's going to be 5 or 6 changes. Well, to be honest with you, I don't know whether 5 or 6 changes is necessarily going to improve the side. I mean, it's a crisis of confidence, obviously, when you get rolled, as Australia did by South Africa. But mind you, the South African bowling was pretty good, to be fair. And our batting was outside Warner, Kawaja and Smith, yes, somewhere between inept and poor. So at the moment there seems to be a little exercise going on this weekend with 3 Sheffield Shield matches to find batting replacements. Obviously Adam Burgess won't be playing regardless of form because of the concussion. And so it would seem to me that a chap called Peter Hanscom, who scored a double century today for Victoria and has been in the wings for a while, is probably going to get that spot. Outside that, I don't know what they're going to do. I just hope they don't panic too much, because it's a pink ball test, and if there's 8 millimetres of grass on the Adelaide Oval pitch as there was last year, when we squeaked in by 3 wickets against New Zealand, it'll be a lottery. And goodness knows, I'm so sorry to be the Aussie optimist again, Australia might even win.
You're obviously getting better, Jim.
Yes, right. Yes, I'm ready for the Ashes.
Yeah.
Ready to unleash.
I'll talk to Jim Max, because we're just waking up back at home. You can recognise the voice is sounding very cheerful, which is great news. But I'll talk to Jim at lunch here. It's 415 for 7. So India lost 3 wickets this morning in adding 98 runs. They'll be back on the field in about 20 minutes or so. Jim, I just wonder, because obviously we haven't been looking at anything in the internet. We haven't been looking up anything to do with Australia. We haven't been gloating. We haven't been, we've obviously just let you all get on with it down there. Did you see any of this coming or not? I mean, honestly, did you see this crisis was looming into view?
I wouldn't say I saw any crisis. I mean, who'd see a crisis when you bowled a team out for 242 and you're none for 158? Yes. And in a moment or two after that, Steyn breaks down. You'd think, well, South Africa, they're in trouble here, and Australia will go on and win the match. It didn't happen quite like that. We had another collapse. I think in terms of confidence, a bit of this was set up, obviously losing in Sri Lanka, but Australia's always losing in the subcontinent, so are most other teams these days. And then they sent a second string team, as it were, to South Africa, because they wanted to rest fast bowlers, and we got minced up badly by South Africa. And I would have thought psychologically, in terms of some momentum, we gave up a bit of ground to South Africa there. But as I say, everything looked to be back to normal when Warner and Shaun Marsh were going about their business so diligently in Perth. And then it turned around as it can. And then Australia lost the toss in Hobart on a pitch that had a bit in it. And South Africa, I mean, this is as good a South African attack without Steyn that I've seen for a while. They applied themselves to screwing Australia like Warner McGrath did to every opposing side for a number of years. And
generally, I think the media is a little more supportive, perhaps, of its national teams than perhaps the British press. You know, I think I'd think that's probably a fair comment. Until it gets to a point, and then wow, they go absolutely piling in. And it seems to have reached that point now with the old amateur team I saw on the back page of one of the newspapers there, the worst teams in this lot or something, and the saggy green cap. And I mean, it just seems now that they're getting an absolute kicking.
Well, Steve Smith probably gave them the cue when he said at the end of the test match that Australia lost in less than 2.5 days over. That was humiliating. There was no pride in the baggy green. There needs to be more fight. So he certainly gave the media the opportunity. He wasn't offering any excuses for the inept performance. He was railing against it too. So that makes you think that Northern Voges is going to disappear from this side when it's announced in a couple of days. And well, of course, Rod Marsh has resigned as well, in exasperation, no doubt, with the schedule, with the players, with everything. He's at his wit's end, like the rest of the selectors. I know from Mark Waugh before this last test, he said you can't pick a better team. The Sheffield Shield's weak. It's not producing batsmen of quality. No one's scoring runs consistently. This is the best team we've got. Well, now they're really being forced into a corner to pick some other players, and it could be sort of panic stations and a rough old time for a while, but I'm sure they'll sort it out before you guys arrive next year.
You can hope, Jim. But of course the trouble is they're going to go into a day-nighter, and I mean I'm assuming that there could be a number of players who are pulled into this test who've just never experienced anything like that before.
That's true. Yes, and you look at players like Burns and Ferguson. Burns pulled back into the side after being dropped. Ferguson 32, making his debut. He is from Adelaide. Are they going to give those fellas another go, or are they going to make wholesale changes and say, okay, we're going to pick Travis Head or Matt Renshaw, someone on the periphery? Now that Greg Chappell's entered the selection
re-entered, I think, isn't it?
Well, re-entered, yes, he's the national talent manager, but he's always about youth. And some people are saying it's as far as Greece is concerned, too much about it, and they need to pick players of experience. But who is there on the periphery? You see, that is the problem. So you're going to see a few names you've never heard of, I would imagine, coming into the test team, and you just hope that they have a bit of a stick and pick attitude if that's going to be the case, and don't turn over a whole lot of players between now and the end of the series against Pakistan, because I think they need to go that way if they can. But I think the selectors would say it's a bit of a talent crisis as much as a crisis of confidence about the Australian team. That said, Australia's lead bowlers are pretty handy in Hazelwood and Stark, and when Pat Cummins re-enters the fray full time, Australia may have a bit of quality with their bowling, but they've got to back it up with their batting, and that's why even the wicketkeeper, Peter Neville, who's the best wicketkeeper in the country, I have to say, he's under pressure because Matthew Wade obviously is a more likely batsman, even though he's not as good a glove. So that's another option for them to be considering. And then Nathan Lyon's gone around the park at the SCG in the last 2 days and hasn't taken a wicket. He's barely got a wicket in the series. So is his position under threat for, say, Stephen O'Keefe or John Holland with their left arm spin? So, but things are a little bit shaky, whereas South Africa are enjoying themselves and playing some very confident cricket.
I do feel just a last thought on the Aussies at the moment, then we'll move on, but I do feel that things are in any way creaking at the top. I mean, you mentioned that Rob Marsh has gone, but what about Steve Smith and Darren Lehmann? I mean, are they under attack, or are people generally leaving them alone?
I think everyone's under attack when you're losing a deep breath here and hope that Australia can come up with a stronger pink ball performance in the next test match. But you know, everyone's out there with the darts. You know what it's like. It's happened to England plenty of times.
Absolutely, and it is ticking. I mean, we're almost, I suppose, exactly a year to go, are we? Until the first test at the Gabba. I mean, it's not far away from that. So your clock is ticking.
Well, all the questions are being asked here about you know, James Sutherland as the man in charge, Pat Howard, the high performance fellow. Do you really need him? How they're handling the fast bowlers with all this resting and rotation and workload monitoring that's going on. Is the schedule contributing to our poor test record? They only played one Sheffield Shield match before they got into the series. Is there too much emphasis on Big Bash? And so it goes. They're pulling the whole thing to pieces.
Yeah. I'm just seeing, Jim, a little line here. Faf du Plessis has now been charged, so it's being reported, with ball tampering, which I must admit, having seen the video the other day, I'm not necessarily surprised about.
Oh, right, well, he could have a holiday, that'll help us.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, because I first saw him in a few tweets and I thought, oh, it's the Aussies again, they're having a go at somebody. Then I saw the video, I thought, that doesn't actually look terribly clever, so I guess I think people perhaps won't be terribly surprised if those who have seen the film of that anyway, that he at least is being charged, at least he has to explain himself, put it that way.
Yes, it's like a bit like 2005, isn't it? Thou shalt not get caught.
Yes.
Yes. The mints. Wasn't it the mints?
It was the mints. I don't think our boys were caught on that occasion. Anyway, let's move on, Jim, because before you got struck down with this, you wrote a book. The Sound of Summer, which is just out now.
Should be one waiting for you, by the way, when you get home.
Have you sent me one? Well, that's very kind. I haven't obviously been through the index to see what you've said about me yet, so that's always the first place to stop.
It'll cost you a few drinks, I reckon. It's pretty good.
Well, I'm sure. Did you enjoy doing it, Jim? And we are lucky in these silly jobs that we have. I mean, we do have lots of good stories to tell.
I did enjoy doing it. I mean, it's a review of my life before I got into this, and the various people I've met, and the characters I've come across, and a somewhat melancholic chapter on our old friend Peter Roebuck,
who was very close to you.
Yeah.
And you were there, well, more or less there, of course, on that fateful night, weren't you?
Indeed. Yeah. It still haunts me just thinking about it. But there's some more amusing stuff on a few cricket tours, and taking on Kerry Packer as I did a couple of times. So there's a few good yarns in the book, yes. and then of course after it had been sent to the printers, I had this stroke, so I've added a preface about that episode just to bring everyone up to date. But you know, there's a rich history there of working with a number of people like yourself and CFJ and Bacchus and the Boyle and Brian Johnson, Alan McGilvray, Tony Cozier, Harsha Bogler. There's so much to connect with that it's made me have a sense of gratitude about my life, really, involved in the game of cricket. So that sort of sense of gratitude is something I cherish and it sustains me. Like just talking to you, we're talking around and about a game that gives us so much to enjoy, because unlike all the other high-speed sports, we can have a little bit of a menu degustation, and we don't have to gobble down our dessert.
No, and we can all get to know each other too, which is lovely. Isn't it strange, Jim, that I don't know how these things work, or whether it's just total not a coincidence, but I suspect some people might say, you know, you've sat down and you've written about your life and you put your life into context, and you know, all of that without thinking for a moment that you could be struck down with a stroke, literally as it's about to come out. I mean, the timing of some of these things it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yes, well, in this case it was because the publishers has been at me for 3 or 4 years, and eventually they do what they always do. Here's a check, here's a deadline, get on with it. So, and August the 1st was the deadline, in fact, and I made it by a week or two, and then within a couple of